Hello and welcome to Shaman Sister Sessions, episode 53. I'm Michelle Hawk and I'm here with my shaman sister, Catherine Bird. This podcast was born out of our work in the world, our investigations into our personal and professional aspects of our spiritual practice, asking each other for hours and hours, having these conversations about what are you excited about in your work? What are you doing? What does it mean? And how can we continue to grow? How can we continue to develop, continue to push each other, continue to witness each other, and support each other in our glorious unfolding in our spiritual practice of what we're supposed to do here on this amazing planet. So today we are discussing developing your psychic abilities. I think on the event post, I made it say gifts, developing your psychic gifts, but I actually really want to say abilities, and we'll get into more about that, what that means, and why your psychic practice is actually a skill and not something that you are innately gifted. So we'll talk about that distinction as we go. But for now, Kat, how are you doing?
I am doing amazingly, getting ready for ceremonial weekend, and then you'll be here the next weekend for Open Your Channel retreat, and then our exciting event the next weekend. So I am super happy that that's almost here and unbelieving that it's already February again. And it seems like we were just sitting here having Shaman Sisters last February talking about things, and here we are again. So I'm doing really well.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Yeah, I had that epiphany yesterday. I was looking through my calendar. I was like, oh yeah, booking stuff for next week. And I look at next week and half of it is booked out because I'm in San Diego, and I get really excited. So yes, it is counting down. For those of you tuning in, either who are in the San Diego area or willing to go to the San Diego area, we've got a couple of awesome events that Kat and I are offering, and there is still space in both of them.
Yeah, and we're actually going to be in Orange, California. So if you're in the LA area, it's not that far. And our retreat that we're doing together, Open Your Channel, which is all about channeling, and also we'll have a lot of working on your psychic abilities as well within that context, because they go hand in hand, and we'll probably discuss a little bit more of that. But we're going to have a stayover intensive retreat and the 9th, 10th, and 11th of February. So if you want to come and work with both of us, this is an amazing opportunity to do so.
Yes, we are almost never in the same physical location at the same time these days, and it's all the more juicy when we are. So, but for today, we're talking about developing our psychic abilities.
Yeah.
Now, this is one of those things that, Kat, I'm sure a lot of people come to you asking this very question of, how do I be more psychic? Right? Or how do I get more psychic, or how do I get better at being psychic? Some variation of this. I hear this all the time. And particularly in my students, I think my clients are, sometimes they're ready for that step. Sometimes they're working on their own healing, but there's this thirst for knowledge of okay, I've had my awakening. I've gotten over the fact that I'm not going crazy. I know this isn't, some sort of form of psychosis, or I know this isn't some form of, just making things up. What do I do with it now is quite often where we get people come our way.
Exactly. And also because people are experiencing more, and things are changing, and all of a sudden they're having awarenesses and realizations around things, and being like, okay, well, this is something that's happening that's new. And, it's always so funny because there's often this sort of almost push-pull within that experience of this is something that's happening that's new. I'm kind of seeing things or hearing things or having awarenesses, and that's so exciting, and I want to have that. And then also, oh no, is it going to be too much? Am I going to see too much? Is it going to be overwhelming? Am I going to see things that are scary? Am I going to be able to control this? Things like that. I even had at one of my retreats this summer, I had someone who in the middle of the retreat was like, I am seeing things. I'm seeing all of these lights and grids and patterns, and it's not going away. And I'm having all of these visuals inside of their retreat. She's like, I've never had this before. And, it was just like this instantaneous, opening of her sight just from being in the container of the retreat. And, with that, you could feel the palpable, like, excitement and interest and oh, okay, this is fun. And then also the, like, oh my gosh, what if this never stops? What if I'm like, won't be able to drive my car properly, or take care of my kid or something, because I'm somehow in this altered state for the rest of my life. So, I really see that a lot, where people are like, but it's, I don't know. Oh no, what do I do now?
Yeah, I think that inner conflict also comes up a lot whenever people have had really strong upbringing or learned experience about intuition is associated with witchcraft or with in some kind of religious or spiritual context. So a lot of people that I speak with who have upbringings in strict religious households, who then have their spiritual awakening, they have to get over that too, about, okay, I'm going to hell, right? Is the first thing that they would have been told about anyone who claims that they're psychic, or who plays with tarot cards, or who talks to spirits, right, is a witch, or is pretending, or is evil, and is going to hell, right? And so then can be a little bit of that too, in terms of the push-pull. So I think that's a really important thing to talk about, or what are some of these sources of resistance that we have to developing our psychic abilities, mm-hmm. and how can we acknowledge them because they're real and important, and then decide how to navigate from there. So let's talk a little bit about some other aspects of those resistance, so like you mentioned, am I going to see things that are too big or too scary for me? Am I going to be able to control it? And will it put me in a place of non-functionality in my human life? And am I going to, right?
Right. And because we hear stories, or maybe we know people who have entered into what, Michelle and I were having a funny conversation this morning about psychotic states, and like where it really becomes something that they cannot handle. And so, it's a very real thing at certain times, to kind of have a little bit of concern for some people, like, okay, well, what does this mean? What does it mean about me? I think that one of the resistances is that if I have these abilities and I have these things that I'm doing, what does it mean about me? Does this mean that I need to quit my job? Does this mean that I need to do this for a living? Am I supposed to be some kind of like telephone psychic? People are going to call me up on the 800 number and I'm going to tell them about their dead grandma. Like, what does it mean? And that it feels like if this is something that I'm opening, then it means that I'm somehow no longer like regular or human, or can live the same kind of life. So everything, is now in question of who I am and what I'm doing and why I'm doing it.
Mm-hmm. There's a grieving aspect quite often that comes with this. And especially since in the Western world here, we live in a society that this isn't the norm. There's then this degree of questioning of, so what does this mean about me, and what am I going to lose if I step into claiming this part of myself? Am I going to lose people that I care about? Are people going to think I'm crazy? Mm-hmm. Am I going to be rejected? Am I going to be, am I going to lose my job, or my street cred, or my authority, or is it safe for me to even talk about this? Especially if we have a job in corporate America, or if we have some career, or spend a lot of time in areas of our lives where this isn't the norm, that people aren't speaking this language, there's a great degree of vulnerability. Like, here in Portland, like, we've got a huge Intel and Nike population, so like these massive tech company and like athletics companies. And I have so many closet spiritual people come to me from Intel and Nike, where they're like, I can't talk about this at work. I don't want to get fired. I don't want to be ostracized. And like, it scares me.
Absolutely. And I've also worked with a lot of people, and people going through the transition of leaving those kinds of positions. And looking at ways to kind of integrate their spirituality and their abilities into, these more standard corporate America places. And it can, you're saying grieving, and some of that grieving is a function of a feeling of aloneness. And I think our very first topic was on building spiritual community, our very first podcast episode. So go back to number 1 and revisit that, because it's very important. Probably one of the foundational aspects of enhancing your psychic abilities is to build a community, a spiritual community, even if it's only one other person that you can talk to about these kinds of things, or maybe a Facebook group, or some place that you can feel seen and heard, witnessed, and like you're not crazy, and you are, able to have community around this stuff.
Mm-hmm. It's incredibly important. If you feel safe, if you feel supported, it is going to be easier for you to step into cultivating these abilities in an easeful way, rather than having them smack you over the head. So this is part of the potential resistance, or that push-pull comes from when we have our awakening experience and we don't know what to do with it. And then there's that fear, that am I going crazy? And then, once you figure out you're not going crazy, like, okay, is this beyond my control? Is this scary stuff? And so we're referencing here a few of our past episodes. I highly recommend you go back and look on the channeling episode, because a lot of what we talk about in relation to channeling, the first channeling episode specifically, is applicable here, as well as the protection and boundaries and energetic survival for empaths and healers. So,
basically go back and watch all of our previous episodes.
Right. Right. Basically, we're talking about, it's all related though, quite honestly. And as we have more and more episodes, it's like, we've already talked about this to some degree, but
right.
That aspect of overcoming the resistance of, is it safe for me to do this?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it is safe for you to do this if you take necessary precautions and call in your protection and do your grounding practice, and make sure that you are completely full and in alignment with your intention. Then it will be safe for you to do this.
Yeah, in presence of your sovereignty, and creating a container for this kind of work so that it doesn't become overwhelming for your system.
Mm-hmm.
So resistances, what other resistances do you find that people show up with? I know that one of my personal resistances is the almost the well, that's not who I am. I don't have that ability. I don't do that. And so I've had to really check myself over and over and over again, because I've heard myself say, oh, I don't really see. I don't see things, right? I'm more of a knowing, feeling, channeling kind of person. But then I had to really tune into, okay, but when I'm in a session, like the thing, like I'm having visions, like think about the way that you know things, you've seen things. It's just that my brain wants to think that seeing something should look a certain way. It should be a certain way, show up in a certain way. And it's just not true. My seeing is the way that my seeing is. And it's amazing. And the more that I put on myself, I don't see, right? I'm just like creating that with my life. Oh, well, then how am I ever expecting to see anything if I say that I don't see? So now I'm very conscious of the fact of giving myself permission to, yes, I see things. This is, and even in my work, I am more likely to say, this is what I'm seeing now than I used to be. I used to not have a missionary of saying that as much. It evolved time for sure for me to be able to say, this is what I'm seeing. Because I don't know, I had these concepts in my head of what it was supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. I think that's an important one. People put attachment on the way in which our psychicness manifests. where, you know, and I've had people say like, oh, I don't hear things, or I don't, yeah. And so I agree. I've heard that too, of like, I don't receive information in this way, XYZ. And yeah, that's going to be true as long as you keep affirming that. So, you know, if you don't want to hear things, like just keep on saying, I don't hear things. Alternatively, if you would like to hear things, you know, there's some affirmation. All you have to do is ask, quite honestly, like really just ask of, you know, hey, guides and teachers, like, let's help me open up my hearing intuitive abilities. Like, help me tune into the messages, to the words, the sounds that are coming through. And you will be astonished at what happens. So that form of resistance. And then I think a form of resistance of, what if I see something that I can't handle? Or what if there's, you know, if I'm tuning in psychically, what if, you know, sort of that I see a demon, or I see something scary, or some entity, like, because people hear about entities, right? And hear like, once you open your psychic abilities, once you open your third eye, you're kind of attractive to all these entities and energies that are coming in. So that also another form of resistance, which is valid. You know, it is a valid fear to have. And it is also very easily overcome with proper protection, grounding, and intention practices.
Exactly. And requests, right? You can request to see things. You can request not to see things. Hey, I'm really not interested in seeing dead people. Thank you very much. You know, you might still sometimes see things, but you can make requests. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. So I would, again, put you back toward look at those episodes in particular, protection and boundaries, the channeling episode, and the energetic survival, for a lot of tools on those specific aspects. So as we delve into, you know, a little bit more about, you know, I guess we kind of skip this part. Like, what do we mean when we're talking about psychic abilities, and why abilities and not gifts? That's a term a lot, right? Gifts, you know, okay. I mean, I'll just go there right now, because not gifts, this gifts implies like, yes, there is some innate talent or innate ability to do something, but it also implies that maybe some people don't have that. Or maybe, you know, some people are better at it than others, or maybe like you don't have to work at it, you're just automatically really good. And I firmly believe that any of those attachments that we put with the word gift actually inhibit our ability to hone a skill. So I would much prefer to refer to psychic practice as an ability or as a skill, because anybody can do it. Anybody can practice it. Anybody can get really, really good at it. And there might be some people who are born a little bit more open, a little bit more easily able to drop into that space, but that doesn't mean that you can't learn it. So if you really want to, and if it's something that you want to cultivate, it is absolutely within your power to do so.
Exactly. It's like some people are really amazing musicians right when they very first pick up, you know, their very first instrument. And some people have to work like heck at that first instrument. But then at a certain point, they're both amazing musicians. And so, you know, we're also just, you know, what are these gifts that we're talking about? Because they can, it's such a wide range, and so encompasses so many different things and abilities. So, you know, some of these are the clairs, as they call them. So clear audience, right? So clear seeing, you know, clairvoyance, clear hearing, clear sentience, which is clear feeling, which a lot of like emotional, connecting to emotions, empathic abilities. What's clear cognizance, which is clear knowing. And then there's other, you know, terms for other abilities that people have. There's even like clear, what's clairgustance, and clairgustance is tasting.
Mm-hmm. And clairaudience, right?
Yeah, is smelling, right? Yeah. You don't hear about those as much.
Well, and I mean, yet sometimes that comes up. Like especially if I'm working with someone with either human or animal with health concerns, or like if I'm talking to an animal and they're telling me like, oh yeah, and I smell something, like I smell some household cleaner that they're really objecting to, or, so it does happen for sure. I'll taste pennies and be like, I have this really metallic taste in my mouth. And then we're talking about like heavy metal toxicity. So yes, it does come up. So the clairs, and then all of these different means of receiving information. Ultimately, that's what we're talking about with the clairs is how do you get information? Are you seeing? Are you hearing? Are you feeling? Are you knowing? Are you smelling? Are you tasting? Are you, some combination of all of those? And quite often, I would say usually actually people have kind of a primary one or two, and the others are embroidered through there. And yet, again, like we were saying, if you want to cultivate the rest of them, you can. And, quite often all you have to do is ask and then practice. Really what I have found is, and so I get it all. I asked, I was one of those people, I was not nervous about this in the least. I was one of those people who was like, yeah, give it all. Like, just bring it on. And as a result, it's been a process for me to like embroider and have like these different inputs, these different sensory inputs. So like as part of a psychic vision or a psychic experience, like I'll have an image, I'll have a sound or words that go with it, I'll have some knowing information about it, I'll have like a feeling in the body and an awareness about these other parts, right? So it's a very holistic piece because I've asked for that and because I've asked for really clear information. And the best way to hone that and practice that is simply to practice. That really, quite honestly, like there's no hot tip or there's no secret to this at all.
Wait, you just like cats out of the bag. There's no hot tip and secret. Practice this shit.
Yeah, do it for 10,000 hours and then you'll be fine. And I'm sorry, not sorry to say it's one of those that, like, really that's all. And ultimately that should be an enormous relief and just as much as anything else, like, oh, that's it. But yeah, that's it. Quite honestly.
Yeah. So how do people practice then?
There are, yeah, that's a great question. If you're interested in psychic shares or psychic practice, I mean, there's all sorts of meetup groups or Facebook groups or, whatever groups. For instance, like just looking at, who's on here, I saw somebody on who I've spoken with about practicing animal communication. And so I know that is a form of psychic practice, is doing animal communication work. And so there's animal communication share groups where, everybody posts a picture or somebody posts a picture and everybody practices talking to that animal. And then you share your messages and then you get feedback. So that's one way. If you've got, ideally, I would say actually it's really good if you're practicing your psychic awareness to work with people or animals that you don't know or you don't know very well, because our emotional bias is one of the things, or our energetic bias can get in the way. It doesn't mean necessarily that the information that you would be getting would be wrong, but say, for example, if I'm working with my dog, I have a very clear intuitive relationship with my dog. I can hear her very well, like very, very clearly. She's an excellent communicator. But if she were to be in health crisis, or if there were to be something really dramatic and challenging going on, it would be really hard for me to connect with her because of that intense emotional connection. So I would actually hire out for somebody in that case. If there were some huge crisis going on and I didn't necessarily feel like I had a clear connection, I would hire out. I got off track a little bit there. How do we practice? Practice groups. That's one option.
Practice groups.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of people have, a professional practice of some kind, like they're doing, some kind of body work or coaching or some other kind of work. And, if you have people that you're willing to be like, hey, yeah, I just got this. Does this mean anything to you? And one of my former business partners, we did men's coaching together. And she's very intuitive and psychic. And but that wasn't really something that was okay in her childhood. And so it was something that was hidden. But when we would work with people, we worked with a lot of very non-woo-woo dudes. And so she would just preface stuff, hey, I might be wrong about this, but this is what I'm getting. This is what I'm sensing. Does this resonate with you? And then, over time, getting people who are like, yes, and oh my gosh, and how did you know that? And wow, that really lands on me. Over time, having that experience with people gives you that confidence to go, okay, so maybe I don't always have to preference it with, I might be wrong here or whatever. But, in certain cases, a lot of times I talk to people, and the thing is that they get things for their clients in sessions, and then they just don't say it. They just keep it in because they're not sure how to approach that. And that's just a really simple, easy tool to use to start to be able to kind of let this stuff come through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or we're afraid we might be wrong, right? And see, I've been doing this for years and years now. I still have that come up, quite honestly. Like, it doesn't come up nearly as often as it used to. It was like at the very beginning, this almost paralyzing fear of like, oh my God, is it going to work? Like, is my psychicness going to work in this session? Here I am in this barn full of horses, and I'm supposed to be talking to the horses and like heart pounding, having done it a million times by that point. And yet, there's this almost relief I experienced every time it did work, because there's like, not taking it for granted, something fairly intangible. And so I would also like to offer, even if you don't have a professional practice, so say you're not a body worker, you don't have any opportunity where you can just include it in your existing practice. People are into psychic stuff. Like, more and more these days, there are more and more people who are curious about that, or like who have always been like kind of wanting to go see a psychic or whatever. So if you've got somebody that, maybe a friend or someone like an acquaintance, or you get kind of chatting about it, or put out an offer on Facebook. This is another thing, is like people are all over this shit. Put an offer on Facebook saying like, hey, I will do free practice readings because I want to practice my psychic reading skills. I'll do a free reading for the first 5 people who private message me and send me a photo and tell me like one question that you want to ask, or whatever it is that you want to do. But I have found when doing distance readings, it is helpful to have a photo and the physical location. It's not strictly necessary. But I mean, people have different kind of levels of comfort around that. So you can ask for, just put it out there and say, this is something I want to do. And you will probably have people jump on it, because that's cool. People are into it. People love hearing stuff about themselves. And so, I mean, if nothing else, then you get a practice reading, a practice situation, and they get to hear something cool.
Mm-hmm. So how else? How else do we? So practice. So that's a lot of practice. We've given you a lot of practice tips.
Ooh, I have got a couple more that are cool. So if you want to like warm up to it a little before you put yourself out there in that way, because that might be a little intimidating. It might be, I don't know, maybe more than you want to push your comfort zone for right now. Start with plants. Start with animals. Start with crystals. If it feels a little bit intimidating to jump to people right away, what I would suggest is find a stone that you know what it's called, but you don't know what it's for. And, so people ask me all the time, like, oh, what's this stone for? I will never straight up answer a person, never. Or like essential oils, no. What I will instead say is go ask the stone, or go ask this plant. And so then you go sit with the stone and you feel its energy. Ask it to introduce itself to you. Ask it, like, notice where do you feel it in your body. Practice the different clairs, right? So if you want to practice these different layers of experience, notice, what do you see with this stone? What do you feel with a stone? What do you hear with a stone? What do you smell with a stone? What do you what do you know? What message does it have for you, etc. And then after you go through all these layers, then go look it up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's your own personal check mechanism. Honestly, though, that practice is flawed because there are so many books out there that just have a generic little thing about amethyst is calming. And like, of course, amethyst is so much more infinitely complex than that.
Yeah,
but
it's not going to always be that way for you at that moment.
Right. But it's a start. And same thing with essential oils. If you're holding an oil, again, what do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you feel? Or again, animal guides, you can do something with that too, but it's a system for you to kind of like test yourself and then go look it up. It's like the practice test, right?
Or just, then be with that stone, use that oil and see if those are the results that you're getting. All of I did a lot of my more shamanic journey work I did with plants before I ever even thought about. I wasn't even sure quite the concepts around working with people and so on and so forth at that point, but working with plants and trees and doing journey work with them. So it's the same thing, and so that's a really good one, Michelle.
Mm-hmm.
And places too, right? You can go into a place, into an old building, creep yourself out real good.
Oh my God. And then go read about the history of the building and say like, oh my gosh, I saw a dead man standing in that corner where somebody died. Like that's, if you want to do that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have those, right? Like my mom, I know that she lived in a house and she would hear this like really heavy footsteps up and down the stairs at night. And she was like banging around, and eventually she went and learned the history of this old house where there was a judge who was very drunkenly, and he would come home every night super drunk. So the old judge was climbing the stairs one more time.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So some really good ways that you can go practice. And yeah, and I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I mean, honestly, again, just doing it, like whatever excuse you can find to do this is going to be your best option.
Yeah. So a lot of, just solo internal practice is really helpful. It's nice to get feedback from people because then you have something to go, oh, okay, well, okay, you're telling me that's true, or that resonates with you, or whatever that is. But it is really important to just do your own personal individual practice. And so what about, Michelle, some maybe tools or kind of techniques or tips or something like that you use or that you teach for people who are working on certain skills?
Let's before we do that, I mean, let's talk about some other examples of how does our psychicness manifest, right? So we talked about channeling, we talked about animal communication. I know a lot of people do dream work, right? Like people get information in the context of dreams. Intuition in regards to body work. You mentioned body workers, so like reading energy flow and pathways through the physical form. You talked about seeing dead people, right? I see dead people. I know you do too. And so like there's mediumship in that way. Working with Akashic records, working with past lives, working with, and galactics. Like we've done a lot of different episodes about different
these things. There's psychometry, which is like holding an object and being able to get an impression from it.
Mm-hmm.
There is, any kind of healing work is utilizing these gifts. Mm-hmm. And, other gifts as well. And we've talked about those things and probably have some other episodes to come on that. But, mm-hmm. Our different kinds of working with our healing gifts are also utilizing what we're picking up, what we're being aware of. We're being aware of energy. We're being aware of sensing emotions, of sensing things. So, mm-hmm. What else? What are some of the other ways that this can show up for people?
I would talk about, well, we discussed this in our channeling episodes, but different ideas or inspiration, technologies, things that traditionally fall under the muse categories. So like art, music,
art, writing.
yeah.
There is like channeled writing, and then there's also very inspired writing. So, basically like a spirit just totally coming through and taking you over. And then there's also where you're, working with these inspirations and abilities that are bringing things in. It is such a huge part of our lives that we're not usually aware that it is happening almost more often than not. And when you feel like you're in the flow state that they talk about a lot right now, like, oh, I'm in the flow state, which is a place where your brain waves have actually shifted. If you're in a space where I'm feeling very inspired, connected, these are often places where these gifts are there. They're vibrating with us at those times and those moments. Synchronicities, right? A lot of times we'll go, oh, synchronicities. I'm having synchronicities in my life. Well, some of those are, little messages that we're getting, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We had somebody chat in a question asking about, is it helpful to practice this work outside or in nature, away from the city, away from EMFs or energetic stimuli? It can be. I don't think it's strictly necessary. It depends on your degree of sensitivity. It depends on also, quite frankly, your intention and your protection and your grounding. So again, I really encourage you to go back to those episodes to talk, because the way in which we are more sensitive to EMFs or sensitive to electric frequencies, our sensitivity is increased when we are not grounded, when we are unhealthy, when we are susceptible, so just like our bodies have,
When we have heavy metals, that makes us extremely EMF sensitive. When our organ systems are off in, like Chinese medicine, I'm very aware of EMF and quite sensitive to it. I don't live in the city. One of the reasons that I don't, that and because I have better birds out here, and but I can still do this work in the city, even if I don't like to be in the city as much.
Yeah, and ultimately, don't let it be a deal breaker for you.
No, don't be like, oh, well, I can't because of this.
Right, or I can only be psychic under these conditions. Again, there are, sort of these like optimal, so Kat, when do you feel the most psychic? Like when is it easiest for you? That flow state. What are some of the things that are in place where it's just effortless?
I'm well rested is a big one. I've done personal practice for myself. I've grounded. I have space, so I don't feel like I'm being rushed. Those are probably huge ones for me, and that I'm asking, that I've shown up and I've connected to my guides, I've connected to my higher self, and I'm asking for information. I don't get actually a lot of information unless I'm specifically asking for it. I don't run around all day long, getting things all the time. Honestly, I have intuitive hits about things and feeling states about things, but it really is asking me.
Right. And Kat, I think ultimately that speaks to the aspect of setting the intention and having office hours, psychic office hours, which I know we talked about in channeling episode and mediumship episode, where if we, kind of part of that fear that we talked about at the beginning and potential resistance at the beginning of, well, once I open my psychic awareness, am I just going to be hit over the head with stuff all the time? No, not if you, say like, these are my open hours, you know, or I'm sleeping now, don't bother me, come back tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning, you know? And so when we're asking like, okay, I'm ready, I'm open to receive information, there's that extra degree of permission and invitation too.
Yeah. And this is really important when you're opening up these abilities, because a lot of people, what happens is they start to open these things up, and then all of a sudden I'm getting a message from here and a message from here. And this person wants, you know, I think, you know, it's, oh, I'm at the grocery store and this person's whatever needs to hear this thing. And people think that that means that they're supposed to do that and they're supposed to be that way all the time. And you don't have to. You can totally human out. Just because you're working on these skills doesn't mean you're not human and you can't be human, and relax, go see a movie, drink a beer, like be normal too. It just doesn't mean you're not going to ever be normal and you're just going to be flooded with messages all over the place.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think to your list, I would add Wellnourished for, you know, kind of these conditions. And again, it's not conditional upon these, but like the times when I feel most easily in tune with just letting it flow through me are, I've had enough sleep. I had, again, like not feeling rushed, especially in the morning, you know, before I'm taking appointments or whatever. I did my own personal practice. I've had my proper minerals. I've had, you know, my blood sugars in a good space.
Little bit nice caffeine, cup of tea for me. Not too full, like not like, oh, I'm going to go eat a giant heavy meal and then try to really tune in. That's not going to be the best place. I mean, nourished, but not like overly saturated with all of your energies in the gut trying to work on digestion.
Right. Yeah. And so, you know, it's funny you mentioned caffeine. I can't do coffee on a day that I have to be psychic. It is really hard for me. And I mean, I can still do it, but it's just like, I feel like I have to muscle through it as opposed to just letting it go. But I can do tea. So
tea. I don't do coffee very often, and usually not on days that I'm really when I work with people, I don't drink coffee.
Yeah. Yeah. Same thing. I had to learn that the hard way. I had this one time, I remember I had a cup of coffee it might have been like a cup and a half, and I had a client coming over half an hour later and I felt like I was vibrating out of my skin. I'm like, you know, this sort of feeling. And it was a lot of work for me and I mean, I was fine to do the session, but I had to ground and breathe and like do embodiment practice. And then finally, by the time he came over, I was in a good spot. But I mean, I don't have time for that all the time. So just like, don't drink the coffee if you have, you know, if you want to be psychic later, like, and that's your deal breaker. Or that's the thing that makes it hard for you.
Yeah.
You get to learn these things again by also, I would highly hot tip here, keep a journal of your psychic experiences.
Hot tip.
There's the hot tip. There it is keep a journal. But, you know, notice not only, you know, pay attention to, and actually here, I'm going to give you some journal prompts or some things to note in your journal. For your psychic experiences, how did you feel going in? You know, so like, how was your mental state, your emotional state, your physical state, your well-being? What was the experience itself like? How did you receive that information? You know, just as important as the information that you received, but how? Did you see it? Did you hear it? Did you smell it? Did you feel it? Did you know it? Etc. So which of the clairs? And then how did you feel afterwards? So really kind of noticing, bookending the experience, and then also during the experience, not only what happened, but in what way.
Super helpful. Mm-hmm. And just from a chatted in question, when we're talking about grounding, you know, earthing, grounding with your feet off on the earth, amazing. You're not always going to have the time to put an hour a day of your feet on the earth, and maybe it's snowing and whatever. So, you know, a lot of what we're talking about here is energetic grounding, of being present inside the body, of utilizing focus on the breath, of feeling the legs, feeling the feet, feeling the toes, breathing down into the earth, connecting into the earth, into the energy body, into the earth's energy body, and being very present with the electric field of the earth. And using slow breathing to connect to that rhythm of the earth, instead of, oh, I'm way up here, and sometimes we when we're, you know, developing things up here, we can feel a little ungrounded. So it's super important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the bigger the foundation, you know, so we've talked about the pyramid thing before. I know I've given this little diagram, but, you know, if you want to build a pyramid and the base is this big, your pyramid can be this tall. You know, base of the pyramid is this big, your pyramid can be this tall. And in this analogy, your pyramid is your psychic structure. And the bigger your foundation, the higher, quote unquote, you'll be able to go, meaning the more easily and effortlessly you will be able to access your intuitive psychic abilities and energies. So putting effort into the foundation of your practice is essential.
So what other tips can we leave people with here for developing these abilities?
I would encourage people to develop not only in the area, or what I would consider like your primary area of interest, but flex your muscles in other ways as well, because it will make you a better practitioner in your primary area of interest. So, you know, imagine like going to the gym and all you do is bicep curls because you want super ripped arms, right? It will throw for this analogy, like, oh my gosh, I want
that guy.
Don't be that person, right? And then they're walking around on little stick legs that look like they're going to break, right? Don't be that person psychically or energetically either. So, you know, it's really important to have, in this analogy, to have a really well-balanced, appropriately developed body. You need to work different parts of yourself. You need to work different muscle groups. And ultimately, then that makes that person more able to support muscle mass in a certain area, right? So the same thing goes energetically, where if you want to be really, really good at this one thing psychically, also practice other things, because it will enhance your ability to have more depth and have more understanding different aspects of this practice, rather than if you just go do the one thing all the time, it's going to get stagnant. It's going to, like, inherently, if you do one thing forever and ever and ever, if you do one personal practice every single day, like, it's going to get stagnant. So doing other things and practicing, developing other areas of interest is going to help you in this primary area.
I would say that utilizing tools, so you know, tarot cards or different kinds of card decks, runes, pendulums, what else can we, I mean, learn how to read tea leaves or palms or astrology, or like any of these ways that we can connect to another person energetically, and even to ourselves. Like, okay, so I'm going to read these cards every day for myself, and what do I get? And, you know, about this situation that I have in my life, and then kind of see what I get and then see what happens. And, you know, these ways are kind of like doorways, because it's really hard sometimes to just sit in front of somebody and be like, oh, well, I, you know, get this and that. Like, that can be really challenging. So if you have a tool of, okay, this is what I see here, and then you can start to let other things kind of come in from the sideline and kind of bleed into the reading and the experience that you're having with this person based on just impressions that you're getting that are coming to you. It may or may not, like some of the best card readers, it's like, you're like, you're not using these cards. Like, what are you doing? You know, because they're just like going through and they're getting impressions from, like, that's not in that card. Like, you know? So that's a good tool.
Oh yeah, the tools, I think, and especially for somebody who's beginning their practice, you know, there's that comfort. It's almost like a degree of removal, you know, and because again, we're humans, we have egos, like we like to be right. We like to, you know, and we want to make sure, like, how can I set myself up for success and having a good experience doing this work? And it's fun to do cards. Cards are beautiful. They're pretty. Like, my favorite tool that I was using, especially, you know, actually I used for quite a long time, I still use somewhat occasionally, but much less, because I rely on it much less, is a pendulum. And I made so many pendulums. I gifted people pendulums. I sold them, and I taught pendulum workshops, you know, because they're fun, they're pretty, they're sparkly, they're made of beautiful crystals, they're shiny. And it's also a degree of, okay, I get this piece of information, I'm going to test it and get a yes or a no, like, confirming before I deliver this information. And I would say the contexts under which I still use a pendulum primarily are with really, really challenging information. So, asking some deeply, deeply vulnerable questions. If, for example, I'm working with an animal who's gone missing and the person is wondering if their animal's still alive or not, and like tuning into, okay, well, I feel like they're still in their body, but I want to make sure, or I feel like they've left their body, but I want to make sure. That's an example where, like, okay, extra degree of validation before I deliver that information. But it does take kind of a little bit of step of removal and, sort of protecting our fragile egos as we're developing a new skill, for sure.
Yeah.
And it's just fun.
For me, I just want to talk about like how we, kind of approach things, and we talk about the third eye, and we talk about this like awakening this area, and there are different little practices and videos and things on saying all different kinds of conflictory information as to like how to do this, and some of it is not trying so hard. And I know that I got to get things right, and I got to be good at everything kind of a person. So I will over try a lot of times and like exhaust myself in the over trying and the overlooking and the over like trying to find the answer. Not actually helpful. And that, we can think about the third eye being here in the forehead. And a lot of times people will kind of like really focus all their attention and energy here. But actually this center runs all the way through the head and through to the back of the head, to the back of the skull back here. And, in my channeling work, I talk a lot about really connecting to this part of the body and this part of the skull. And I found that very helpful for people to be able to connect and open up their channel. And so just having that conscious awareness of that, it's not like you're just it's not like this is the movie screen and you're going to see the movie on your forehead if you just look hard enough with your eyeballs there. There's a larger scope of reality, of energetic reality going on with the third eye, thinking about it coming straight through, and then also all the way around the head. So being conscious and aware of that, and even massaging and relaxing these areas of the head can be very helpful before going in. It's like, oh, well, if it's super tense, there's muscle tension. That's also like can open that up and create more blood flow to the brain. That it kind of like relaxes this part of the body. Relaxing, stretching and opening and relaxing the neck can be very helpful before, doing just a little yoga before going into, maybe I'm going to sit with this crystal, can be very helpful just to get the energy and the blood flowing and to relax the head. And another tool that I use, some people, they close their eyes. I have a client, and she's like, I work with my client. I close my eyes when I start. I open my eyes at the end. That's it. I don't open my eyes at all the whole session. And I will close my eyes sometimes in sessions, but I actually have found over the years that I don't close my eyes, that if I actually relax my eyes and allow kind of almost a different, like the muscles to relax and then readjust, so that there's a little bit of almost, I don't know what they call that. What do they call that? It's like they're not super focused on one thing. Focus. It's a soft focus, and there's different muscles that are coming into play than usually if I'm looking at something, like I'm reading a book. it's like now I would not be able to read a book, but somehow that focus of my eyes helps me to see in a way. So playing with, okay, what works for you? Well, if I keep my eyes open and I kind of focus on this whole part of my brain, that feels really easy to me. Or if I use soft focus, maybe looking at a candle and finding like that focus point is really helpful for me. What works for everybody is not necessarily going to be the thing that works for you the best. And figuring out your own thing is really helpful.
Right. Which is, again, going back to the journaling and keeping record of your experiences is going to be one of your most valuable tools in cultivating your psychic abilities in your practice. So again, how are you feeling going in? What do you notice during the experience? And a lot of these tools that Kat just listed would be really valuable to keep track of like, okay, well, where was my awareness in my field? How, what practices did I do as a warm up? Did I do yoga? Did I do embodiment practice? Did I set an intention? Did I light a candle? Just really delve into all those variables so that then you can notice like, okay, when I do, and then you do this a bunch of times, right? And then you go back and you look through and you say, okay, well, when I do a practice that opens up my body, my information is much clearer. Or when I try to do psychic work on an empty stomach, I don't feel as connected to the information, or on a super full, or whatever the deal is. But honestly, keeping track of this information, I'm such a nerd, and it really serves even in the psychic realms. I love spreadsheets.
Get her psychic spreadsheet.
Psychic spreadsheets. I didn't actually do this. I'm just saying, if that's your jam, but keep track of what are all these different pieces, and notice there will be commonalities.
I love that. Michelle, that's going to be your opt-in on the psychic spreadsheet.
Oh my God. Is that my lead magnet?
Yeah, it's your lead magnet. No, don't do that.
I think maybe one person would be interested.
one super left brain psychic person.
They exist.
So what else? I had something, but I forgot. So go ahead.
I was just going to leave people with a little, walk yourself through. Also, don't try to do it for super long at first.
Yeah. You just a few minutes, just give yourself little spurts. Don't be like, oh, I have to sit here for an hour and focus on this thing. No, you don't. And you will have, you will have days, you will have times of day that you are more tuned in and more psychic. Some people are exhausted in the evening, and it is not going to do them any good to do this kind of work in the evening. Some people aren't at their best in the morning. Some people, I'm probably the best, in the, I'm not going to get up and give you an 8 a.m. anything. So, afternoon is going to be best for me. And also on certain days, the cosmos affects us a lot. So, what's going on in the planets will actually affect our abilities in some ways. And also for women, and I believe also for men, that we are affected by our cycles. And, a lot of women do express that when they're on their moon, that they feel more psychic and have more psychic information coming in, which, will just mean that on other days you might feel less psychic. You might feel more on some. So that's another thing you can journal, of kind of tracking just the dates and the days and, times when you feel more on it and when you don't. And then you will know, oh, well, this is when the best time for me to connect is first thing in the morning.
Right. And again, don't let it be a deal breaker. So what you're doing is you're gathering information and finding the most ideal, under these conditions, it is easiest for me to reach this state. But that being said, do not let that be if you want to be psychic at another time or under other conditions, or, you're really invested in getting a piece of information for somebody, or it's an emergency or something, you can still be psychic under other conditions. Don't make it like, well, I don't have my pendulum and I don't have my meditation cushion and I don't have my journal and I don't have my yoga practice. Like, you can still be psychic, I promise. Just ask. Ultimately, again, you know, I know we've said this like a bajillion times, intention is your most powerful tool. I think that's our first time we said that on this episode, but other episodes, we talk about that a lot. Intention is your most powerful tool.
And the next one is self-awareness, which we talk about in all of our episodes. So it's not just that you're going to receive some information from out in the great beyond. A lot of it is tracking your own sensations, your own feelings, what's going on in your heart, what's going on in your gut, what's going on in your skin. Are you getting goosebumps all of a sudden when you start talking about something? You know, there's these sensations that are happening. And so that self-awareness, which comes from spending time alone and spending time in the quiet and hanging out with yourself and noticing your responses to things, is also the piece. So intention and self-awareness, those are kind of the tools for everything in the world. I don't know, maybe.
Yes, everything. Everything, intention and self-awareness. So give yourself, you know, set yourself up for success with your practices, with your, you know, with your journal, with your consistency, with your regularity, with committing to the work, but then also understand that even without all that stuff, you can still do it anyway. And I would offer that advice particularly to beginning practitioners, because I know that's something that I had to get over, was the idea of like, okay, for my healing work, you know, I remember at the beginning of my practice, for my healing work, like, well, I need my feathers and I need my drum and I need my crystals. And, you know, and I think, Kat, we even talked about this on a certain episode, like, I really like to have all those things, but I don't need them in order to do my healing work. And I really like having my quiet space, my sort of optimum hours and my optimum nutrition and everything for my psychic abilities, but I don't have to have that. You know, and so give yourself that permission of set yourself up for success, but don't let it be an excuse that you can't do it if you really need to or want to. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Really
well,
good.
Huh?
I said really good. Yay.
Yeah. We're all really good. Oh, and here's one other thing. One other piece of information that I have for you, people who are working on developing your psychic abilities. You are already good. You are already good at being psychic. The only thing that will change, and perhaps you can guess what I'm going to say, but what is the only thing that could possibly change from where you are now to being a professional psychic or whatever? I don't even know. What's the only thing that can change is your practice. This is your practice. That's really quite it, is how many times you do it. But the actual energetics of psychic work, you're already tuned into. You're already receiving the information, but the thing that changes is your comfort with it, your ability to allow it to move through you, your ability to say yes, and your ability to discern between we didn't even talk about that. Like, what is mine and what is not mine? That's like one of the most fundamental components of psych. Sorry, everybody. We dropped the ball on like one of the most important pieces here. I'm going to tell it to you because it really is quite this easy. What is mine and what is not mine? Like discernment and being able to say like, okay, this thing that I'm seeing belongs to me. This thing that I'm seeing does not belong to me. Mm-hmm. And actually knowing the difference. And the only way that you can do that is by doing it 10,000 times.
And asking and ask.
And basically everything that we spent this whole hour talking about. If you want more about that, I know we talked about, we had an intuition episode that we did quite a while ago. That was an early episode about intuition and practicing your discernment.
Yes, that's a good one.
Yeah, so I would refer you back to that.
We've mentioned the intuition episode, the protection and boundaries. Let's see, the channeling episode.
Energetic survival
for empaths. So you've got, another 5 hours worth of Shaman Sisters to check out that you'll have tons of of tips and tricks. And anything else, Michelle, that we need to address?
I would just say, drop us a line, let us know how it goes. You can contact us through our email address, shamansistersessions@gmail.com. We are available to hear from you, and we like hearing updates. So go ahead and shoot us a message. Let us know how your practice is going. Let us know if there's anything that you'd like to hear us talk about on the show. Send us some topic ideas. Send us fan mail. Send us testimonies. We love that. You can
send us money.
Yeah, there's I've got a donate button. I think, do we have it on our YouTube page as well, or a donate button?
I don't know. No idea. But subscribe to our YouTube channel, Shaman Sister Sessions. And also you can like our videos and give us stars on iTunes and Stitcher, and tell your friends, share on Facebook if you receive any value from any of our episodes. It's super helpful for us because we love doing this and getting the word out about this work. And Michelle, do you have anything coming up before you come down here?
Not before I come down there. I'm trying to remember what we're talking about next week so I can give people a heads up. I don't remember what topic we decided. I've got my I Am Alchemy work that if you're interested in speaking with me about alchemy and where you are in your own personal alchemy, you can send me a message again through that shamansistersessions@gmail.com, and we can go ahead from there and tune into based on, and some of this actually came up in our last episode that we did about alchemy of the personal process. And that's something that I am shepherding people through in a few different ways, both individually and then as part of a training program. So I Am Alchemy and personal alchemy work is what's on my radar and what I'm excited about these days. Oh, and I've got an event tomorrow, Wednesday, which is tomorrow. If you're here local in the Portland area, I'm doing a full moon in Leo lunar alchemy event. So if you're local and you'd like to come, you can go ahead and register for that.
Thanks, Michelle. And Michelle will be down here for Open Your Channel Retreat, the 9th, 10th, and 11th of February. It is going to be amazing. Lots of experiential practices and working on increasing our abilities and skills. And then we will also be hosting a shorter kind of day-long experience, which is called
Visionary Code Activation.
Visionary Code Activation. So it's going to be a lot of beautiful work, embodiment and channeling, and working on installing new visionary codes and clearing out anything that's in the way of those codes being there. Woo! So again, engage with us on our Facebook page, Shaman Sister Sessions. And one more thing for Michelle.
One more thing. I just looked up our episode for next week because I wanted people to get excited. We're talking about Dark Night of the Soul.
Yay!
Yay! Dark Night of the Soul, shadow stuff. We love this shit. So, everybody's had one, at least one, probably more than one, crisis of faith. What does it mean when we're going through the darkest of dark? And what is the role, the vital role that plays in our spiritual awakening and evolution? So join us next week for a live panel on Dark Night of the Soul.
Yay. Thank you, Michelle. Oh, goodness, I have a hiccup. And we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.